Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to preface what I'm going to say with this statement that, without doubt, unequivocally, I attach myself to a Salafiyyah. What is a Salafiyyah? Um, it's very simple, and it's not as difficult as some people attempt to make it. It's basically you are following the way and the understanding of the Salaf. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Khairun nas qarni, thumma ladina yalunahum, thumma ladina yalunahum." That the best of the people are first his generation, or those of his generation, those that come after them, and then those that come after them. They are our Salaf. So if you have any understanding of Arabic grammar, then you understand the harf of ascription. So because we follow the Salaf, we are Salafi. I don't want to get too deep into that because that's not the point. Back in the mid 90s, I was in front of the local masjid and I heard one of my friends say the word Salafi. I had no idea what he was talking about or even what that word meant at that time. And I heard him say it more than once. So finally I asked him, I said, what are you talking about? And he tried to explain it. And it wasn't that clear to me at that point. And then it started to pick up energy. And I began to hear it from more than one person, especially amongst the African Americans. I began to hear this word Salafi, this, Salafi's that, Salafi, Salafi, Salafi. So I began to look into it, and then brothers hipped me to QSS. And I began to listen to the likes of Abu Usama al-Dha'abi, and some of the other callers who are attached to the QSS. And I really dug and understood what they were saying. And I began to believe it to be what was correct. When I used to go back in the days of QSS, we're talking about QSS out of Canada and out of Detroit. I'm from Detroit, but I was living out of state. They used to have these magnificent conferences. Conferences were gorgeous. I mean, just the brotherhood. Brothers would come from all over America to attend these conferences. And it was a beautiful thing. I mean, it was true brotherhood. Now, I tend to look at things through the lens of a sociologist, which I am. I'm a sociologist by trade. And I don't believe in accidents, in coincidences, per se. When you look at African American history and you look at African American movements that attempted to change the situation of African Americans in America, you know, and you saw there were exogenous forces that did not want that to happen. So there were agents and different agendas that were enacted to ensure that the unity of the African Americans didn't last. It was weak. Likewise, Salafiyyah. Again, in the 90s, when I first understood or began to learn about Salafiyyah, there was a beautiful unity and togetherness that existed. I mean, the conferences were just, they were so good. Everyone got along. There was no backbiting. There was no infighting. There was none of that. But then all of a sudden, and I don't know where it came from. I don't necessarily know the origin of it. But again, being a sociologist, I have my own opinion and my own ideas of more than likely where it came from. But there was all of a sudden this division came and people began to choose sides. There began to be people from outside of our communities that began to sort of dictate who we listened to, who we took from. And these people began to tell us this person is not acceptable. That person is not acceptable. Now, one thing that I found, and at the time I didn't realize it, but something that I realized on down the road, it seemed like just about every caller or every da'i that was an actual graduate from one of the universities who was actually educated and qualified to guide us were the ones that were the most warned against. From Abu Muslima, Abu Usama, they used to roast Abu Usama and anybody that had love for him, to the point that brothers told me that they went to sit downs with sisters, and the first question the sister would ask is, what is your position on Abu Usama? And if the brother was like, I'm free from him, then she was like, I don't want to marry you. So his name was breaking up marriages because he was painted as a deviant. He was painted as a person that is against the Sunnah. He's against the Quran. And it wasn't just him. The list is long. And it's extended from back in the 90s up till today. Almost every one of the African-American callers is warned against. Shadid, Sheikh Tahir Wyatt, Muhammad Mufti Munir, Ali Davis, Abu Sajid, the Imam Muslim Family Center, so on and so forth. Warned against, left, right, and center. But the exogenous forces, I think, came into play because it's understood that Islam unifies, which changes the dynamics of everything, politically, economically, obviously spiritually, morally. It changes things. You always have two forces at work. You have Islam, you have Allah, and you have a shaitan. And the shaitan's job, his mission, is to misguide, is to throw people off of the path of Allah. These divisions, again, were created for the sole purpose of dividing and conquering and making sure that, there was no unity. Now, we were given this predatory brand of Salafiyyah. If you don't take from this specific sheikh, you're off it. You're not Salafi. You might not even be Muslim. Sheikh such and such, he said this about this individual. What's your position on that individual? If your position was not in alignment with the sheikh's position, you weren't Salafi. And in some cases, maybe takfir was made. It depends. So we were given this predatory version of a Salafiyyah. Now, keep in mind, this is all that we knew. We didn't know any better. There were very few people at that time that had gone overseas and studied and came back. And those that did were all warned against from people normally outside of our communities and outside of America. They were warned against. Don't listen to them. They're from the Mubtadi'een. They're this, they're that. Don't listen to them. So we turned our back on our own callers and only took from people who weren't even from our communities. So this predatory type of Salafiyyah, again, it consisted of only taking from a few of the ulama. Everything was presented to us binary. What do I mean by binary? I mean this or that, black or white. There was no gray area. As I began to develop and travel a little bit, I went and lived in Egypt for several years. And I took advantage of studying while I was there. And one thing that I learned, or that I noticed, was that, wait a minute, Salafis here, meaning in Egypt, are different than the Salafis in America in their character, in how they approach ilm, knowledge, how they approach this deen, how they interact with their brothers is different. It wasn't this binary, this or that, black or white, take from this sheikh or you're an innovator. There was none of that. So there was a molding, a new molding of what I understood Salafiyyah to be. So, I lived in Egypt all through the revolutions and after the revolutions for a while. And then I returned to America. Now, let me go backwards. While I was in Egypt, I learned that there is gray area. I learned that you don't have to take. You're not obligated to take from one particular sheikh. And if you don't take from that sheikh, then your Islam is in question. Your Salafiyyah is in question. I learned that that's not correct. But that's what we were taught because that's all we knew. Now you have more graduates. You have more people who are going overseas from America, from your communities, from my communities, learning what's proper, learning the correct understanding based on the Quran and the Sunnah and the way of our Salaf and bringing it back. And now they're starting to fight against the predatory version of Salafiyyah that we were taught. That version of Salafiyyah is dying, but we're still being held by that standard by people outside of Salafiyyah. People who are outside of Salafiyyah, I am talking about deviant sects, the deviant Sufis, the Jamaat Tabligh, the Ikhwan Muslimin, all these different groups, the Shia, all of them, they all are living in the past and judging those who claim Salafiyyah by that old standard that we lived by. The people who are now more mature, more learned, have learned the Arabic language, who now do not have to rely simply and solely on translation, but have the ability to read and understand on their own, have a different approach to Salafiyyah and how they deal with people and how they approach this religion. But we're still being judged and held accountable by that old version of ourselves. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, we are evolving, we are changing, we are becoming more educated and more mature. Salafiyyah without doubt is the haqq, it's the truth. What else is there outside of a Salafiyyah? What else is there outside of understanding this deen the way that the best of all the generations understood it? What comes after that? If you don't understand it that way, then what exactly are you understanding? So I just wanted to sort of drop that Salafiyyah and its approach now is not what it was back in the day. Back in the day, as I mentioned before, there were less of us that had gone overseas. There were less of us that had any type of grasp or hold of the Arabic language. Nowadays, though, that's not the case. There's lots of brothers that are going overseas, be it Egypt, be it Saudi, be it Southeast Asia, Yemen, so on and so forth. So it's important that we do not hold people who call to or claim a Salafiyyah by that old standard, by that old version, that old approach. That's swiftly dying out. And if you hear people that are, promoting that, meaning people outside of Salafiyyah, you always have those outside of Salafiyyah that want to talk about back in the day, that want to talk about what happened back during the day of Abu Usama and Abu Uwais, rahimahullah, and the rest. They want to live in the past, but we're evolving, we're maturing, and things are getting better. We're becoming more educated. I would implore any Muslim from the West, but primarily African Americans, get your passport, travel, see the world, and you will see that what you've been taught here isn't necessarily what's going on in the rest of the Muslim world. When I lived in Egypt, I lived in an area that was pretty common and very popular amongst the Talab al-Ilm, amongst the students of knowledge. They would come from the darkest of Africa. They would come from France, Britain, Germany, Kazakhstan, Chechnya, Russia, America, South Africa, Southeast Asia, Australia. I met Muslims from so many different places who gathered for the purpose of seeking knowledge. And all of them clung to, or the mass majority clung to a Salafiyyah. They married their daughters amongst themselves, regardless of color. So that takes away that whole ism of racism that we find prevalent here in America. They married their daughters off. They married their sisters off. They married, amongst themselves with no problem. No one cared about nationality. No one cared about race. No one cared about socioeconomic situation per se. As long as that brother could provide for that woman, the most important thing was the deen. And this was a Salafiyyah. This is how I experienced Salafiyyah overseas. One thing that I noticed amongst the students in Egypt was that there was not any, or very, very, very little, like minute conversations in reference to individuals. Who's on it? This, who's off it? The sheikh said this about this person, or the sheikh said that about that person. What do you think about this person? There was none of that. None of that. It was normally, and I mean normally meaning almost 100%, conversations were knowledge-based. Everyone was there for the purpose of seeking knowledge. So there was no time for, individuals. I do remember a couple situations in particular where the scholars spoke about individuals. Sheikh Raslan, I remember, he spoke about individuals. And that's his place to speak about individuals. He's a sheikh and he's from Egypt, and he was talking about people who lived in Egypt. And he warned against those people. That's his place. He's qualified to do that. But you didn't hear that amongst the students. Sheikh Al-Banna, he was asked a specific question one time about two callers in Egypt. We were at Markaz Al-Ibana, and he was giving a talk there. He was asked specifically, so that's why those individuals were spoken about. But outside of that, the real students didn't have time for that. The real students, you would almost always see them with books. I remember walking in the souk in the evening time, and I'm new to this, And I remember seeing students, and you would see the same people because we all lived in the same neighborhood. We all shopped in the same places and took our families to the same places. So you would get used to seeing brothers, faces became familiar. And, you would see brothers walking with their families, pushing baby strollers, and the brother would always have a bag with him or something, carrying his books. And when the family would stop, the wife want to go into a shop and look at something. I don't know how many times I saw brothers break open that bag, break those books out. Murajia. They began to revise, have the highlighter out. And I used to see this behavior, not just amongst one or two other brothers, but I would see it all over the place. And it, made an impression on me. They weren't just standing around wasting time being idle. Most of the time, it was about study. And this is something I think that's hard to believe, hard to picture in your mind, people that dedicated and that devoted to seeking knowledge. Even amongst the students, when you would see them just having regular conversation, many, many, many times it was knowledge-based. It wasn't just idle conversation. It was knowledge-based conversation. Going over hadith, going over Arabic grammar, going over whatever book they were studying, and there were so many students from so many different levels. It was a beautiful mix. But we don't really have that here. And I remember when I came back to this country, the first thing that I experienced was people asking me, do you know this individual, this caller here in America? I was like, who is that? I don't know who that is. I didn't know any of the callers here in America, none of them. And I wasn't interested in them. I'd just come from Egypt, and I had been submerged in seeking knowledge and being around those people. So when I came back to America, I didn't know who any of these callers were. And really, frankly, I didn't care, but the longer you're here, ignorance can rub off on you, and you begin to listen and hear and become knowledgeable to who said this and who said that, because you're sort of drowning in those waters. So make dua for me. I'm ready to go back overseas. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. And I would advise anyone else who has the opportunity or the ability to go overseas and study and spend time outside of America to do that. Take your families and get out of here. Study. Go experience something different. It's better for you and it's better for your deen. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.